Hello guys, welcome to today's tutorial, and in today's video I'll be showing us how we can implement a phone number authentication using Firebase as well as Angular 12. As we all know, Firebase offers an array of options in which you can log in into an application, some of which includes the use of the traditional email and password, Facebook, Google. It even offers anonymous login. But for this tutorial, we'll be making use of the phone number authentication service. So quickly, let me show you a demo of what we're going to do today. Right in the browser, we have a form that takes in a phone number. So I'm going to input my phone number. You can input yours at the end of this video. If you follow along, you surely get an SMS if you follow it step by step. So, but for the sake of this tutorial, my phone number is connected to my Gmail account for you to see how I got the OTP code. So let me click on the get OTP. It directs me to another page if the phone number is correct, as we see. So this OTP, this form has an autofocus functionality. That is, if I enter a number, it goes straight to the next input, and I can also clear the input field by going back. A behavior similar to that of a mobile application. So let me head to my Gmail account to see if I've gotten the OTP code. So as you can see, I have. So I open the email and then copy the OTP and then head back to the page for me to enter the OTP code, and I paste it in. So let's click on the button to verify. So if the OTP code is genuine, it will head me back to the dash. It will head me straight to the dashboard. If it's not, it will bring up an error. So let's click on the verify OTP. And as you can see, it directs me to the dashboard, and right in the dashboard, it displays my phone number. So as you can see on the nav bar, we have a logout button. So if I click on the logout, it logs me out of the dashboard. If I go back to the dashboard, as you can see, there is no route protection. So that will be done in the next tutorial. But for the sake of this tutorial, we'll be focusing only on the phone number login. So without wasting much time, let's get right into it. So as a quick reminder, please do not forget to like and subscribe so the YouTube algorithm can keep recommending my videos. We start up. So right in my directory, I run the Angular command ng new. So we can say, we can call the application phone auth, and then I press enter. It asks if we need routing for this application. Yes, we will need the router, and we'll be making use of CSS also. So it generates the Angular application for us. So as you can see, our application has been successfully generated. So let's move into the directory. So I type cd phone auth. So let's open this in Visual Studio Code. So the next thing we're going to do is generate the components we need for this application to be built. So we need 3 components. So the first component I'm going to generate is the phone component that takes in the phone number. So I'm going to run ng generate component. I'm going to call it phone dash number. The next component, which is going to take in the code once the phone number has been imputed into the field. So the last component we're going to create is called the dashboard. So let me clear this code and type in dashboard. So now that all our components have been created, let's check how it looks like in VS Code. So I head to the SRC folder, the app folder, and as you can see, we have code, dashboard, as well as phone number component. So the next thing I'm going to do is to import the Bootstrap 5 CDN, because we're making use of Bootstrap in this application. So I type in Bootstrap 5, head straight to the documentation, and then I copy the import link, head back to my index.html file, and right in the head I paste the link. So next thing we need to do is to install Firebase as well as Angular Fire. So let me run npm install Firebase as well as at Angular / fire. Then I press enter. So while this is being installed, I head straight to the Firebase console. So if you don't have an account, you can go to firebase.com and create a new account. Right there, you'll be able to create a new project. So as you can see, I've created some projects here. So I'm going to create add project button. It's going to ask for the name of my project. I'm going to call it phone-auth. Then I press continue. Then it asks us if we want to enable Google Analytics for this project. I don't think we need that. So I disable it and click on create project. So once that is successfully created, I click on continue and it takes me straight to the project dashboard. So now that we're on the project dashboard, the first thing we're going to do is to head over to the authentication. And then inside the authentication, we have a sign-in method tab. What we need to do is to click on this tab and then we edit the phone number. The phone, under the provider, we edit the phone. As you can see here, we enable the phone and then we click on save. So now we have the feature to implement phone number authentication right in our application. As you can see, there are other ways in which you can log in, which includes Google and the likes. One more thing we need to do is to get the Firebase API key. It comes in form of an object. So I head over to the project overview, click on project settings, and it takes me to a new page. And you can click on this icon right here. And then it asks us to give the app a nickname. So I can just type in phone and then register the app. Once this is done, it's going to generate our Firebase API key objects. We'll need this inside of our application on Visual Studio Code. So all I need to do is to copy this Firebase config object, head to Visual Studio Code. Under our environment, we have environment.ts as well as the environment prod.ts. So we need to paste it in both of the files. So what we need to do now is to put a comma right here and type in Firebase colon open a object and then paste it right into the environment object. So I copy this Firebase object, head over to environment.prod.ts, and I'll do the same. With this, we'll be able to initialize Firebase. Next thing we need to do is to check if Firebase has been installed. So I head over to the package.json file. As you can see, we have Firebase as well as Angular Fire installed. So the version of the Firebase we have is version 8, while the version of Angular Fire we have is version 6. But it's worthy to note that a few days before this tutorial, a new version of Firebase and Angular Fire was released. We now have a version 9 of Firebase as well as a version 7 of Angular Fire. These new versions have a new way or new ways in which we can integrate them into our application, but for this video we'll not focus on that. In future videos I'll be showing us how we can integrate the newly created versions. So the next thing we need to do is to import and then inject the necessary modules. So I head to my notepad, then I copy and then paste some of these modules in my app.module.ts file. So what we did was we brought in the forms module because we're making use of the ng form. We also brought in Angular Fire module, the Angular Firehouse module, the Angular Firestore module, as well as the environment file. So next thing we need to do is to inject these newly imported modules into our import array. So once again, I head back to my notepad, then I copy this and then I paste it in our file. So with this, Firebase is now initialized in our application, and then as well as the forms module. So let me save. Up next, we need to set up our routing. So for us to do that, we need to head over to the app-routing.module.ts file. And inside of this file, we have a route array. And inside of this array, we're going to create our objects. So the first part we need to create is that of the phone number component. So I'm going to type in path, and then we call this route phone. And then we signify the component that takes in this phone. That will be our phone component. So the next part we need to create is that of the code component. So I open a new bracket, type in path, and it's going to be called code. And the component is going to be called code component. And then the next part is that for the dashboard. So I type in path, dashboard, component dashboard. And then finally, we need to create a base part. So this is the part that would take a specific component when we're in the root of our application. So we direct to, that will be the phone route, and then we'll give it a path match of full. So there's an error here. That's because we haven't brought in our phone components. So with that, our routing is set up for this application. So I save, and then I head over to the app.component.cs file. If you are creating a new project, you might see some boilerplate here. What you have to do is just to clear it and then have this particular router outlet tag available so that the routing can work effectively. To ensure we don't have any form of error, I'm going to start my application from the terminal. So I head over to the terminal, and then I type in ng-serve-o. This is going to compile the application and then display the app in the browser. As you can see, our app has been successfully compiled. I check the terminal, there are no errors. I check the console, there are also no errors. So that means we can head over to the next thing, which is to design our phone components. So in the phone components, what I'm going to do is to paste in a boilerplate HTML. So I copy this from my notepad, I paste this here. Basically what we have here is a div, is a form that contains an input field that takes in our phone number using the Bootstrap 5 classes. It also has some CSS to make the page look nice. So I copy some of the CSS, head over to the phone component CSS file and paste it there. So what we have to do is to save and see how the page looks on the browser. So as you can see, our phone components form is looking good to go. So the next thing is to make this form functional. To do that, we need to apply some logic in our TS file. So I head over to the CS file. So I need to bring in Firebase into this file. To do that, I'm going to import Firebase from Firebase /app, and also I'm going to bring in import Firebase /auth, and as well as Firebase /firestore. Next thing we need to bring in is the Angular Fire auth as well as the Angular router. So quickly, let's import that. Next up, we need to create two variables which we're going to use in our Firebase function. The first one is called the phone number variable, to get the value of the phone number from our form. We're going to assign it the type of any. Then there's something called reCAPTCHA. We need to create a variable for that called reCAPTCHA verifier. We're going to also assign it a type of any. So next up, let's create a function that makes our that generates our code for the phone number. So I'm gonna call this function get OTP, and inside of this function, I'm gonna make reference to the variable we created above, which is the reCAPTCHA verifier. So we're gonna say this dot reCAPTCHA verifier. So I'm gonna say new Firebase dot auth dot reCAPTCHA verifier. It takes in two things. The first thing it takes is an ID, which will be creating in our HTML file soon. So before I do that, let me head to the HTML file and then create the ID. So it can be anywhere in our HTML tag. So I can just create a new div here and then give it an ID called sign in button. So let's copy this, head back to our TS file and paste it in. So the second argument is to show how we want our reCAPTCHA to come on the page. We don't want it to show on the page, so we're gonna assign it an object of size invisible. So size invisible. Then we can move forward to signing in with phone number, which is a Firebase API. So let's make reference to Firebase. So I'm gonna say Firebase dot auth dot sign in with phone number. The sign in with phone number function takes into arguments. As you can see here, it says expected 2 arguments but got 0. So the first argument is going to be the phone number and the second argument is going to be the reCAPTCHA verifier. So let's make reference to the phone number. So I'm going to say this dot phone number and then this dot reCAPTCHA. Can't see what we are typing. reCAPTCHA verifier. Then with this, it returns a promise. So for us to subscribe the promise, we make use of the then in JavaScript. So it returns a confirmation result. So I'm going to type in confirmation result, assign it an arrow function, and then for us to be sure we are doing the right thing, I think the first thing we need to do is to console.log the confirmation result. So what I'm going to do is console.log confirmation result. So before I save, I need to bind our phone number to our HTML using the ng form, using the ng model. To do that, I head over to our HTML file and inside the input tag, I create the ng model attribute, which is also called a banana in a box. So it takes in an ng model and a variable of phone number, which we created in the TS file earlier. Then we can assign it other attributes like a minimum, a min attribute of 10, and then a max attribute of 15. Then also for the name, we can give it a name of phone number. I think that's all we need to do. Then for the button, we need to make use of a click event handler. So I'm gonna create the click event handler and it's gonna take in the name of the function we created in our TS file, which is called get OTP. So I paste it there. Then I save, head back to the browser, open the console in case of any error. So our app compiled successfully. What I'm gonna do is to type in my phone number, which is this, and click on get OTP. Then we get an error which says no Firebase app.app instance is currently initialized. I think this is because Firebase is not being initialized. So one way to work around this is to head back to our TS file and then I can create a variable up here. So inside of this variable, we can assign the Firebase object. Usually it's supposed to work when we implemented this in the app.module file, but for some reason it doesn't initialize, so I will have to do it inside of this file. So I head over to the environment ts file, copy the object you have here, and then paste it inside of here, and then in our ng on init, I'm gonna get rid of this void, and then make reference to the newly created object. So I can say firebase dot initialize app, and then pass in the config objects which we created above. So if I save, I believe that error should not appear anymore. Let's enter the phone number. As you can see, we have this recaptcha showing at the bottom right corner of our page, as well as the confirmation verification ID for the confirmation results. So this shows our app is working properly. So this verification ID, I would like to set it to local storage because we need to get it when we get to our code page. It's what we are going to use to verify if we are trying to sign in the right user. So I head back to my phone number ts file, and then I set the confirmation results to local storage. To do this, I can say local storage dot set item, and inside of the set item we can call the name verification ID, and we need to stringify this, and then we pass in the confirmation results, and then we want to save the verification ID, so I copy this verification ID and as well paste it there. So anytime we click on the get OTP button, it saves our confirmation ID inside of the local storage, so we can always access it. So the next thing we want to do is to navigate to the code component once the verification ID is sent. So what I can do is to say this dot router dot navigate, and then I make reference to the code component, so /code. So what we have here is property router does not exist, so we haven't injected the router in our constructor. So I can say private router, I can say that to router. So the error is gone. So because this return is a promise, we need to catch any form of error we might have. So I can just say dot catch, and then pass in an error as well as the arrow function, and inside of the arrow function we can alert error dot message. So if there's any error, it shows an alert box. So because I want the phone number to clear off when there's an error, so I can just create a set timeout function which comes with JavaScript. So I can say set timeout, create an anonymous arrow function, and inside of this function I can say window dot location dot reload, and then I want this to occur 5 seconds after the error occurs. So let me save and see if what we did here works properly. So I paste in my phone number once again, click on the get OTP button, the recaptcha verifier is being initialized, and then we get navigated to the code component. So that works properly. So the next thing we need to do is to create the UI for the code component. So in the code component, we made use of an input field which has some autofocus functionality. This was done with the use of an npm package called ng otp input. So what I'm going to do is to copy this npm line and then stop the server, clear the server, and then install the ng otp inputs package. So now that the npm package ng otp inputs has been installed, let's import and inject it into our application. To do that, I'm going to copy this line of code, the ng otp module, head to the app module.cs file, paste it directly below the environment, and then copy it and inject in the import array. Next thing we need to do is to grab the HTML code in the documentation, the ngotp tag, head to the HTML file of the code components page, paste it in. So it seems to have an error. ngotp is not a known element, and anytime we get this error message, custom element schema, one way we can avoid this is to head back to our app modules file. Inside of the ng module objects, what we can do is to bring in the custom element schema. Then at the bottom of the page, we can inject this in. So with that, we get rid of some of the errors in our code components page. So what we need to do is next is to implement this particular on OTP change function. So I'm going to copy this, head to my code component.ts file, and at the bottom of the file, I'm going to paste that in. So it's expected to take in an argument, because in the HTML file it has one argument, but it doesn't have any arguments in the function we create in the CS file. So one way we can do this is to say OTP code and assign it a type of any. So that gets rid of the error. So also we need to bring in Firebase to the code component. So quickly, let me head to the phone CS file and copy the Firebase import and then inject it here, as well as the router import. Then we can save what we have in the app module file, get rid of the app module file. So let's save and then run the server once again. So as you can see on our code page, we have an input field that can take in some numbers, and for us to implement this properly, we need to set up some configuration. So in my notepad, I'm going to copy this, head back to the TS file, and then just directly below the constructor, let me paste in this config object. As you can see, inside this config object, we have some configuration settings. For instance, we have an allow number only option. We set the length to 6. Then we have no placeholder and some other things. So let me save this and head over to the components HTML file. Instead of the length, what we're going to have here is config, because that's what we call the configuration setting object. So we save, then let's see if some of the changes we implemented takes place in the browser. So I type in a number. If I try to type in a letter, it won't be implemented in the field because we did not allow any letter in our settings with this particular attribute. So next thing we will need to do is to try to access the verification ID we set in our phone component. So to do this, I'm going to create two variables. The first one is called OTP. I'm going to call it, assign it a type of string, and then the second one is called verify, and I'm going to assign the type of any. For some reason, we have an error here which says property OTP has no initializer. So one way to get rid of this is to add an exclamation mark in front of it. So in our ng units, we can access our local storage by making reference to the verify variable we created above. So I can say this dot verify. So let's pass whatever we're getting from the local storage. So I'll say json.pass local storage dot get item. I called it verification ID, but to confirm, I'm going to open my console, head to application, and then local hosts. Under local storage, we have local host for 200, and as you can see here, we have a verification ID. So I'm going to copy this particular key, head back to my Visual Studio Code, and then paste it in. So we also have an error. One way to get rid of this error is to pass in an OR operator and then give it an empty object bracket. So that will ensure we are always having a particular variable when the engine its lifecycle is run. So let's console log this and see what we have in the browser. So console.log this.verify. Let me save and then let's check our console. As you can see, we now have the verification ID. I don't like the way this form looks. Let's quickly add a little bit of design to the form, maybe to make it be at the center of the page. So inside the ngotp, I'm gonna create a new div. I'm gonna call this, paste this into the div, and then to the div I'm gonna assign it a class name of OTP, and then in the CSS file I'm gonna paste this particular code. Then let's save and see how the form looks. As you can see, this is now at the center of the page. Next thing we need to do is to pass in the code we got from our phone number anytime we enter a phone number in the previous page. So let's create a new function. We'll call this function undo click. So inside of this function, we're gonna make use of the Firebase phone auth provider. So let me create a new variable. So I'll say var credentials is equals to Firebase dot auth dot phone auth provider dot credential. It's gonna take in two variables, the verification ID and then the OTP. So I can just say this dot verify, which we gain access to from the local storage inside our engine init lifecycle hook. Then the next thing we need to pass is this dot OTP. Now quickly, I want us to get the value of anything we enter into this input field. So to do that, I'm gonna say this dot OTP is equals to OTP code. So let me console log the OTP, this dot OTP, save, head straight to the browser, and then in our console, let's type in. As you can see, every number we type into the OTP reflects in the console. This is because we're making use of an event handler called onInputChange, which takes in the OTP change function. So with this, our credentials variable has a verification ID as well as the OTP code we type into the form. Next thing we need to do is to make use of the sign in with credential function in Firebase. So to do that, I can just say Firebase dot sign in credential. So it takes in an actual credential which we created above, and with this it returns a promise. So we can subscribe to this promise by with the dot then keyword. So I can just pass in a response, an arrow function. Then inside of this arrow function, we can decide to either console log our response or do anything we want to do with it. So I think let's console log the response to be sure we're getting something back. So I'm gonna type in the response and then I'm gonna save. And before I head into the browser, let's not forget we need to create a button that we need to click to verify the OTP. So straight in our HTML file, I'm gonna create a button which is gonna have a class of btn dash success, which are all bootstrap 5 classes, and then it's gonna have a margin top of 4. So, and inside of this, I'm gonna call it, gonna put a test of verify OTP. And lastly, we need to pass in a click event handler It's going to take in the function we created, which we called undo click. So I'm going to copy that, paste it in, then we save. So to ensure what we did works properly, what I'm going to do is to head to the landing page of the application to enter our phone number. So let me enter my phone number, click on get OTP. It's going to run the reCAPTCHA verifier to ensure it's a correct phone number. If it is, then it takes us to the code page where we kind of verify our OTP. So let me quickly check my email address, which is connected to my phone number, to see if I've gotten any OTP. As you can see, I just got the OTP code. So I'm going to copy it, head to my app, paste in the code, and then click on verify OTP to see if we get any response. As you can see, we get a response. It says operation type, we've been signed in into the application, and then we have a user object in this application. So I think with that, we have successfully implemented the phone code authentication. But before we go, we need to sign into the dashboard. So to do that, what I'm going to do is to route the application to the dashboard. So I can just say this.router.navigate takes in an array. So I'm going to type in the dashboard route. We haven't injected the router in the constructor, so I can just say private router and then pass in the router. One more thing I want to do is set the user's data to the local storage. So I can just say local storage, because I want also to display the phone number inside of the dashboard. So I can just say local storage dot set item. Then we can call it user underscore data, and then we can stringify our response. So I can just say JSON dot stringify. So that's what we need to do. And before I forget, because we just returned the promise, we need to catch the error in case if you have any form of error. So I can just say catch error and then pass in an arrow function. So I can just alert error.message. So I think that's all we need to do in this particular component. So I'm going to save, head back to the browser, let the page refresh. I enter my phone number, click on get OTP. Then on the OTP page, we need to head to our Gmail once again to see if we've gotten a new code. And as expected, we have. So I'm going to copy this code, paste it in. I want to get some sort of error, so let me clear this 3 and maybe put in 4 and click on verify OTP. As you can see, we get an error, an alert error that says the SMS verification code used to create the phone auth credential is invalid. So what we can do is to enter the correct figure, which is, I think, 3. Okay, it's 4. So let me enter 4, click on verify OTP. Oh shit, I entered the wrong figure once again. So let me just copy this and then paste this in, click on verify OTP and see if, yes, we just got routed to the dashboard, which means our app is working perfectly. So for the dashboard, I want us to show some navigation bar and then the phone number. So to do that, we can just quickly head to the HTML page, and then so I have a nav bar in my notepad. I can just copy this, which contains Bootstrap 5 classes. So I just paste it in, then I save. Let's see if we have any difference. Yes, as you can see, we now have a nav bar, but that's not enough. We need to get the phone number. So to get the phone number, we need to access it from the local storage. So quickly, let's head to Visual Studio Code, and inside of Visual Studio Code in the TS file, for this to work, we need the Angular router, and also we need the Angular Fire auth. So I can just import because we're going to implement logout also. So Angular. So next thing we need to do is to create a variable. I can call this variable user data and assign it a type of any. So inside our ng on init, we can access the user data we set in our code components to the local storage by saying var data is equals to. So we need to pass anything we get from local storage. So pass json.pass local storage dot get item. So the item we want to get is called user data. So once again, we need to pass in the or operator and then assign it a empty brackets. So with that, we can access data from the local storage. Then our global variable, which is this dot user data, we can assign the data to it. So with that, we should be able to get the user data. And for us to be sure, let me console log the user data. So this dot user data. So finally, let's implement the logout. So I can create a new function and call it logout. So inside of the logout, I can just return this dot. So we haven't injected the router and the Angular file. So quickly in the constructor, so both of our packages has been properly injected. So here I can just say these dots, let's make it uppercase. So this dots Angular file auth dots, we have a sign out function in Firebase. So I'm gonna call that function sign out. It also returns a promise. So let's subscribe to it with the done then keyword in JavaScript. So I can just say this dot router dot navigate. It's gonna take us to our landing page, which is the phone component. So phone. So I think that's all we need to do. So now let's inject the logout function in our dashboard navbar. So I head to the HTML page. So inside of this div, I can just call the click event handler, pass in the logout function, and then we can save. Head to the browser. So we are getting an empty object in dashboard component 17. Let's check what we have there. So our user data object is empty. Let's check if we are getting it correctly from local storage. So okay, it's user underscore data, so not user data this way. So let's save and check the browser to see if we have the user data. Yeah, as you can see, we now have the user data. So quickly to implement the phone number on the page. So in our HTML file, what we can do is to maybe probably create an h2 tag, and inside this h2 tag, I can say welcome to the dashboard user. Then I can just say user data, which is a variable we created in our TS file. So user data. So to be sure we are getting the phone number here, what we can do is to say data dot user dot phone number. So if we check where the phone number is in the user data object, you can see it here. So it's inside the user object. So we need to do data dot user dot phone number. So if I save all the files, I believe this should display properly on the page. And there you go. We have the phone number of the user that is logged in. So finally, let's click on our logout. And we are logged out from the application. So I think that's it for this tutorial. If you enjoy what you saw, please make sure you like and subscribe. And if you have any questions as we try to implement the application, you can drop it in the comment section below. as I'll be sure to answer your questions. In the next tutorial, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I'll be implementing a router guard to protect our dashboard so that any form of user will not be allowed to log into the application. So that's it for today's video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.